Greetings, students, and welcome to our very last video together. We are going to be doing our study session for exam number 4. So again, remember, we're talking about 2 time periods. We're talking about middle adulthood, which is the ages of 25 to 65, and then we're also talking about late adulthood and death and dying. So chapter 20, again, the ages of adulthood and middle adulthood we're referring to are 25 to 65. As the brain ages, our reaction time lengthens, right? We kind of try to make a point to say that we get slower as we get older because our cognitive mind needs a little bit more time to process, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that is, right? Those neurotransmitters are decreasing. So that's why. Alzheimer's gene, there is a 1 in 1,000 chance of inheriting the genetic gene for Alzheimer's. Senescence, or the aging process, is first seen in our skin. We tend to judge people based on their outward appearance and the skin. In middle adulthood, you lose nearly an inch in height. Nearly an inch in height. Sterilized women in the U.S., 2/3 of sexually active women over the age of 35 are sterilized, meaning that they will no longer bear children. Whether that be through having their tubes tied, whether that be through a hysterectomy, they have chosen, not all the time, because this could have been a mandatory situation for medical reasons, but they've chosen to no longer have children and to be sterilized. Percentage of infertile couples, 12% of our couples in the U.S. Struggle with infertility. Menopause relates to the situation that women encounter in this middle adulthood. Andropause refers to the situation that men encounter, again, during this middle adulthood. Remember that it's very different for menopause. This means that women will no longer be able to conceive children. Whereas for andropause, it means that there is a reduction in the amount of testosterone that is produced by males. However, men can sire children well into their 90s. Well into later life. Metabolism and aging, so our metabolism slows down. This is why we put on weight, right? So the metabolism is your body's ability to convert food to energy. And when we have a high metabolism, we burn through food, right? So I remember when my son was 16 and he was on the water polo team at school, and he literally would have to eat like huge servings every 2 hours. He was burning through calories, high metabolism. As we age, that process slows down. That means we pack on the weight, right? We're going to hold on to those calories a little bit more. Disability. Disability is difficulty performing normal activities of daily life, ADLs, because of a physical, mental, or emotional condition. That's the definition of disability. 2 factors that protect our health: money and education. The more money you have, the more education you have, typically the healthier you are. Birth weight for women over 40 is increasing. We've seen that trend. Women are waiting to have a family until their later years. Cancer, death causes. So we know that some of the main causes of cancer are actually lifestyle behaviors or lifestyle choices. This has to do with smoking, diet, exercise, or lack of those things. So those different things are choices that we make, and those are definitely contributing to the high rate of cancer that we have. Chapter 21, IQ scores increase after our early 20s, right? So we can still improve our intelligence. Fluid intelligence relates to quick and flexible thinking. So fluid intelligence, think of water, right? Thinking of quick and flexible, that is fluid intelligence. Practical intelligence really refers to being able to solve real world problems. So those kind of everyday situations that we have, that's where we use our practical intelligence. Right? Creative intelligence requires divergent thinking. It requires to think outside the box. So creative intelligence, divergent thinking. Cognitive functioning can be impaired by 2 things. Major stressors, that means that you go through losing a job, right? You go through a breakup. And daily hassles. So the constant fights that you might have with either family members or your partner, Both of those things can really impair our ability to think and function. So if you're having, daily hassles with somebody and you try to go to school, go to work and focus on a situation, it's difficult. Your mind has a difficult time with that. Mortality in adulthood is related to stress a person endured in childhood and adolescence. We've talked a lot about Erickson, and we've talked a lot about how the things that happen to us in our early years do have a lot to do with how we function, have a lot to do with our personality as we grow up. Women's work, I should put quotation marks around that term. Women's work, that term or those words is really used to denigrate domestic and caregiving tasks by women. It's meant as a derogatory term to kind of say that if you were to tell a man that he was doing woman's work because he was watching the kids, right? And that really is not the case. Abstract thinking and speed of thinking, again, make up fluid thinking. Abstract thinking and speed of thought. Major stressors and minor hassles negatively impact our health, right? So remember for the exam, both of these two things, not just one. Major stressors and minor hassles, they negatively impact our health. The more we have of those things, the less healthy we are, right? Because how you're feeling and your stress, remember, releases a lot of cortisol into your system, which affects our health. And so both of those things can impact our health. Chapter 22, development into adulthood is proposed by which theorist? Erickson. Erickson is the only theorist who says that we continue to grow as we go into adulthood. Sigmund Freud believed that when you hit, 18 or 21, when you hit that kind of emerging adulthood stage, you no longer developed, you were kind of done. And Erickson proposes that as we're talking about emerging adulthood, middle adulthood, and late adulthood, that he says you continue to grow, and we grow emotionally in these different ways. So he is the answer there. He's the only theorist who does that. The developmental stage for this age group is going to be generativity versus stagnation. So again, for the exam, keep them separate. When we're talking about middle adulthood, we're talking about generativity versus stagnation. When we're talking about late adulthood, right, we're talking about that. Do you feel like you have integrity versus despair, right? Do you feel like you led a good life? Maslow's third level, talking about the triangle, right? That first level on the triangle is physiological or basic needs. The second level is going to be safety. And that third level is love and belonging. Remember, we have to go in order. We can't think about love and belonging if we are hungry, right? So we have to have each level precedes the level above it. Big five personality traits are apparent in every culture and generation or era. That's what that means. So in every generation and in every culture, we really kind of see this manifestation of those big five traits that we learned about in this chapter. Friendships and aging improve. So as we get older, we become better. We're able to be better friends to our friends, right? We are a lot more forgiving as we age, and we don't hold things just hold on to things and become bitter about things, but we forgive. We realize how important friendships are. So it gets better. Sibling relationships also tend to become closer. So sibling relationships get better as we age. Fictive kin. Fictive kin are people that are accepted into our family, but there are no biological ties. So fictive kin, people that we think of as family, but there's no blood relation, right? So in the second case study that we did, we talked about the foster youth, we talked about Renata, and we talked about Amanda, right? So Renata, for me, is fictive kin, right? She's lived with me. She just gave birth to her first child, baby boy. So she is part of our family, even though there's no blood relation there. Commitment. Commitment is a crucial aspect of love in a relationship. So sometimes people will ask me, what do you think about open marriages? They're not very successful because commitment tends to be such a crucial aspect of a healthy relationship. Rates of remarriage are highest for those who have the most education. Generativity, right? So generativity is this being productive in unselfish and caring ways. That's kind of the definition. The primary way that we kind of manifest the generativity is through having children. It's through contributing to the next generation, right? And so remember that for the exam, two things, right? The definition of generativity is being productive and caring in unselfish ways. And the primary way that we do that is going to be through having children. Stagnation and personal impoverishment is an adult's failure to achieve generativity. So if you feel like you didn't contribute, you really didn't give anything, whether that be through raising children or it be through your career and any contributions that you make, mentoring, right? All of those different things are contributions that would exemplify generativity. If you don't do any of that, then you feel like you're stagnant. To be stagnant really means to stay still, to not move, to be stuck. And so we don't feel very good about ourselves because we feel like we haven't really grown or improved in any kind of a way. The sandwich generation. So the sandwich generation is someone who is kind of in the middle, and you are meeting the needs of two different groups. You're meeting the needs of your children that are still in your home, under 18, and you're meeting the needs of your maybe aging parents or older adult generation. And so you're kind of having two groups of people requiring your attention. And that's really challenging. And we're going to see a lot more people in the sandwich generation because we're waiting later to have children. So if you're waiting later to have children, then your children will be young when you're getting older up in your years, right? And then your parents will be in that aging stage already. Microaggressions. So microaggressions are small things that are unnoticed by the majority population, but they seem aggressive to the minority person, right? So microaggressions are these little things that we can say and do to someone that don't make them feel so good, right? And they happen in our society all the time. We have to be aware of it. The term or the kind of concept of having a senior moment would be an example of a microaggression. So if I were a manager and I had a staff meeting and one of my employees happened to be an elderly individual and I asked them a question and it took this employee a few minutes to think of their response, if one of the other employees said to them, "Oh, Bob, you must be having a senior moment," people might laugh about that, but it's not very encouraging, is it? That would be an example of a microaggression. So you're not really saying something nice to the person, are you? You're kind of making the fun of the fact that they're a little bit slow in their processing, as we've kind of explained is a natural part of aging. And so that would be an example of what a microaggression is, telling a senior they're having a senior moment. Traditional work schedule, only about 50% or half of our adult population is working the Monday through Friday 8 to 5 type of situation, right? A lot of our workers are in the swing shift, graveyard shift. They're in retail, particularly those of you who are interested in nursing. You'll be doing more than likely 3 12-hour shifts for 36 hours a week. And so it's going to be a little different, non-traditional type of scheduling. Midlife crisis. Few of us really believe that a midlife crisis happens, okay? So we talked about menopause and andropause, where there is some physical type of changes in hormones. However, those two things don't lead to a midlife crisis. A midlife crisis, the typical scenario is when a man who has been married for 30 years leaves his wife for his 18-year-old secretary. Right? And he leaves his children, leaves his wife, and he goes off with his secretary. And we kind of say, oh, he had a midlife crisis, so he made this dramatic change in his life. Well, there's really nothing going on hormonally or in any other type of physiological way that would cause that. People are kind of blaming this midlife crisis as to why I made basically an unwise choice. So I think what happens is as we get to be older, as we get to especially 40s, 50s, you start to be very reflective. You look at yourself when you turn 50 and you say, am I where I thought I would be? Am I happy? Right? Did I achieve some of the goals I set out to achieve? And if you're not satisfied with some of those responses, you may then make a choice like running off with someone who's much younger than you and abandoning a family, right? But it's not because of a midlife crisis. It's a choice you made. So understand there is really no such thing as a midlife crisis. Agreeableness with age. So we're talking about those 5 big personality traits, the OCEAN acronym, and agreeableness was one of them. And I think we say that as we get older, we become less neurotic and more, meaning less focused on ourselves and a little bit more agreeable. So if the question on the exam were to be something like, as we age, do we become more agreeable? Yes, that's true. Marital satisfaction and income. There's a direct correlation between the two. Right? So we know that if you have an income level in which you can provide for your needs, you have greater marital satisfaction. What that means is you do not have to be rich to be happy. Okay? What it means is that you and your partner can live within your budget. So you can pay your bills. You're not stressed out fighting about the fact that you can't pay the PG&E this month, because that is going to cause marital stress. And so if we don't have that problem, if we have sufficient income to pay our bills, then that leads to a greater level of marital satisfaction because we're not fighting about money. Okay? But it doesn't mean that we have to be rich. It means we have to live within our means. Chapter 23, now we're moving on to talking about late adulthood. So ageism. Ageism is really a discrimination or judging people based solely on their chronological age. That's it. You're just basing them on the fact that they are elderly. What it does is it undermines seniors' feelings of competence and self-esteem. So remember these 2 things for the exam. One is what it is. So ageism is a discrimination. It's judging someone based solely on their age. What it does for seniors or for those individuals is it makes them feel like incompetent and like they have low self-esteem, because you're judging me without really even knowing me. Elder speak. So elder speak is a very demeaning, derogatory form of addressing an elderly individual. Caregivers and the elderly. So sometimes caregivers can do too much. So caregivers can diminish the independence of the person they're caring for by doing too much for them. So if you are taking care of your grandmother or an elderly individual, you want to allow them to make as many choices as they can on their own. And you don't want to do everything and let them do as much as they physically or emotionally or cognitively can. Demography. Demography is the study of population numbers, right? The percentage of individuals over the age of 65 in the US are about 13%, 13 to 15% of our overall population. The fastest growing age group is that oldest old, that 80 plus, 80 plus. The most common living arrangement for our seniors is with a spouse or alone in their own home. So most of our elderly are not living in nursing homes, but they are living with a spouse or alone in their own home. Sex life and aging. So research actually shows that your sex life improves rather than deteriorates as you age. So there's definitely some physical challenges. It may take a lot longer for arousal, for orgasm as we age. However, throughout the years, a great deal of trust and pleasure seeking has been developed by a couple that has been together for many years, and that leads to a greater experience. Primary and secondary aging really make our overall body systems less efficient, right? So we talked about that, our arteries collect plaque. All of these things are going to happen as we age. This is why exercise is so important. And so we are going to go kind of downhill, right? And so we are not going to be able to function as we did when we were 20 years old. Aging and major body systems, they all slow down, right? So everything slows down. So I talked a little bit about as we age, we get what we call that middle tire spread, right, around the middle, which is a very unhealthy thing to have, right? So again, if you're a female, if you're a woman, much better to be shaped as a pear than an apple. Meaning that for women, it's much healthier for you to carry any excess fat in your hips and in your bottom than it would be for you to carry the fat in the middle area, because anything excess weight in your middle area, the tire, middle age spread, is actually affects your heart. That's excess weight and fat right on your organs, and it's very, very unhealthy. It actually shaves years off your life. And so remember that all of our systems, our metabolism is slowing down, which means, again, we keep on the calories, unlike when we were younger, and we need to really focus on exercising. right? Fragile bones is another term for osteoporosis. Osteoporosis can also be caused by too little exercise. So it is so important, again, as a gerontologist, again, this is what I do. This is what I enjoy, who I enjoy working with this senior population. And understand that as we age, it's normal for our bones to become what we call porous. They become brittle, right? When we're young, our bone is like a solid rock, right? It's think of a long bone and it's solid. However, as we go through the aging process, after the age of 35, you're no longer accruing calcium, and soda and other things deplete your body of calcium. And so your bones become almost like if you had Swiss cheese and there's holes in Swiss cheese, they become like that. They become very weak and brittle. And there's, again, that's why we have a higher risk of falls as we age, and breaking our bones as we age. And so what we need to do as we age, if you want to be healthy, is we need to do what we call weight-bearing exercise. So aerobic exercise, very important for our arteries and to ward off heart disease, right? What's the #1 killer in America? It is not cancer. The #1 killer in America is heart disease. Some of this may be genetic, but for the majority of the population, we can control that, meaning what we eat and whether or not we exercise. And so we want to do that aerobic activity to ward off heart disease and other chronic conditions, but we want to do weights several times a week, because the weight, putting on the weight on your bones kind of strengthens your bones, and it helps ward off or prevent that fragile bone syndrome, that osteoporosis, which kind of typically happens as we age. So be aware, exercise is really, really important. Centenarians. Centenarians are individuals who have lived to be at least 100 years old. My grandmother lived to 102. So when she turned 100, she received a beautiful letter from President Obama thanking her for kind of experiencing 100 years of goodness, of the Great Depression, of wars that she had lived through. It's a really big accomplishment to live to be 100 years old. Increasing longevity. So one of the things that will increase our long life, our longevity, means is being integrated into a community. What we mean by that is, I don't mean that you have to go join your local community center. That's not what we mean. What we mean is that you have to have social connection with some type of community. And the community could be family, right? So my mother comes from a family of 12 children, and she's 80 years old, and my mother still talks to her sisters almost every day. We vacation with her sisters, my aunts, every year. And so that's a community. The fact that she has conversations, the fact that she's having life experiences with that group, it's knowing that people care about you, that they would miss you if you weren't there. It could be a senior that's involved in a local church, right? Because typically local places of worship will have a senior program or some type of assistance and support. And so that's what we mean by integrated into a community. We mean that there's got to be people that you are in a network with. All right, contributing to long life are two things. Lifelong work, meaning that it's really not ideal at 55 or 60 to retire and do nothing else, right? That's actually not ideal. Lifelong work could be retiring from your job, but doing volunteer work, or starting up your own part-time company, right? It could be mentoring young people. It could be doing something. That's what we mean. And then also a diet rich in veggies, right? So we saw all through this whole summer session, we've seen that for every single age group that we've talked about, every age group was deficient and eating the recommended serving of vegetables, right? Every age group. And so we really want to talk about how important it is to do that, right? If you think about, there's a reason that Japan has the largest percentage in population of elderly individuals. Part of it is diet. Part of it is exercise. And part of it is just that they're integrated into a community. If you go to Japan, you're not going to find 200 nursing homes in a city. You're going to find very few nursing homes, if any, because the cultural tradition is to take care of your own. Grandma, grandpa, great-grandma, grandpa, they live in our home with us. It's intergenerational, and we care for them. We don't actually put them in nursing homes. So that's part of the reason that they have long life. Right, maximum lifespan, 122 years. Lifespan, oldest possible age, Life expectancy, average lifespan. Life expectancy for men is 76. Life expectancy for women is 81. We have a 5-year age difference. Why is that? I hope you'll remember this. The reason that there is a difference in the 5-year gap between men and women and why we age differently is because in general, women tend to have more social connections. We tend to be social creatures. We tend to be very sharing and forthright, whereas men tend to be a little bit more talking about external things rather than your feelings all the time. And because of that, women tend to develop these networks of female friends, and friendships lead to long life, definitely. So remember that, guys. We're social creatures. We need people. Demographic shift is that we're going to see more of our aging population and fewer young children. Vision. Almost everyone over the age of 65 will need glasses. Acute illness versus a chronic illness. So an example of acute illness is a heart attack, something that happens right on the spot, typically our ER patients that come in. Whereas a chronic illness would be heart disease. A chronic illness is something that will not go away. We can possibly manage chronic illness, right? Chronic illness would be rheumatoid arthritis, definitely having heart disease, having osteoporosis, right? All of these conditions are chronic, meaning that they're not going to go away. Hopefully we can manage them. Chapter 24, senescence and neurotransmitters. So as we age, the production of neurotransmitters, remember, neurotransmitters were those little tiny chemicals that carry information from one brain neuron to the next. Remember, your brain is like a chain of impulses, and those neurotransmitters help the information get from one to the other. And what happens is they decrease as we age, hence the slower reaction time. This is why senior drivers, they are more cautious in driving because they cannot react as quickly as we did when we're younger. Right? So that production of neurotransmitters slows down. Brain slowdown means we have a slower reaction time. Senility, that term would be considered ageist or discriminatory, so we don't want to use it. It's not nice to call a senior senile. Dementia is the pathological loss of brain functioning. So dementia, we talked, or in our slides, we learned about 3 different kinds. So dementia is an overall pathological loss of brain functioning. The primary form we are familiar with is Alzheimer's disease, right? So from the time an individual gets Alzheimer's disease, it's a kind of a straight angle decline in the brain functioning. The other one we talked about was vascular dementia. And vascular dementia is different because in vascular dementia, what's happening is we're having small strokes in our brain. So we're limiting the blood flow to the brain, and that is causing us, again, to have this loss where you may not remember your family. And then if your family comes back to visit you in 2 weeks, that stroke has dissipated. And what happens is they may remember you now. And you get all excited because it's like, oh, Grandma knew who I was when I went to visit her. And then if you go back in 2 weeks, she's had another stroke. So vascular dementia means you will have a series of continuous strokes. But the trajectory, unlike Alzheimer's, which goes like this, the trajectory is kind of up and down because you'll get better and you'll get worse. And the last one we talked about was Parkinson's disease. And Parkinson's disease first manifests in the body. So you first start to notice tremors with someone who has Parkinson's, and then you develop this rigidity of your muscles where it gets more difficult to walk and to do different things of that nature. And eventually, if the individual lives long enough, they will develop full-on dementia. Okay, so those are the 3 kind of neurocognitive disorders that we learned about. So Alzheimer's disease is partly genetic. Parkinson's disease, again, combines both dementia along with this rigidity of the muscles. Self-actualization, kind of getting to the top of that pyramid in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is more likely to come for those who are older than for those who are younger. Chapter 25, again, Erickson talks about the 8th and final stage or crisis of development, which is integrity versus despair. At the end of life, we want to feel good about the life we've led. We want to have integrity. And what we do is we kind of reassess who we are through every experience that we go through in life, right? So when we go through a divorce, when we go through a remarriage, when we go through the birth of children or having grandchildren, we kind of need to reassess ourselves and see how we fit into that and how we want to process that. Stratification. So we learned about stratification, which there's these 4 different areas, right? Age, our gender, our income, and our ethnicity. And in those 4 things, they can really impact how we age. In other words, if I were, the example in our textbook and in our slides was a widowed woman from India, in which the cultural tradition for a widowed woman from India would be that after her spouse has passed away, she would then become a beggar. She would go to the temple and she would offer up prayers, and the community or society would fill her beggar's bucket so that kind of they are supporting the widows. But she doesn't really have an option to go live with her daughter and help raise grandkids. She doesn't have an option to do possibly some of the other things that in other cultures might be available. So there's kind of like these stratifications, or there's these situations where we're restricted on how we can age, whether or not you have money, right? If you have money and you're aging, you can travel the world and you can have a great experience. If you don't, if you're scraping by on Social Security only, you're trying to figure out how you're going to make it. You may be limited on your food income. And so those things, income, money, gender, ethnicity, all those things play a role in how we age. Working part-time means you're happier. So this is why we're saying it's really not ideal. Most of us think, oh, I can't wait till I retire. I can't wait till I quit my job and I have all day. Well, you know what? After about a month of golf and watching television all day, you're kind of bored. And so we need to have a plan for retirement. And we found from research that if you do some type of part-time work, you're actually happier than if you just stay at home. Elderly prefer to live in their own homes, definitely. So most of us, particularly for our seniors, because our seniors may have lived in the same home for 45 years. And they may have pictures all over the walls, and they may have collectible little knickknacks that they've collected that are special to them. And that's where they want to stay. If you say to them, Grandma, do you want to go live in a nursing home? The answer is no. I don't want to go live in a nursing home. I don't want to take my house full of memories and fit it into a room that I share with someone else. That's not ideal. So most seniors want to live in their own home. Religious involvement correlates with better health. So I said again that if our seniors are connected to a faith group, typically they will be happier and healthier because there is some support. There's going to be connections. There might be some meals provided to them, things of that nature. Our social convoy is the individuals that travel through life in the company of others. So it's this group, whether it be your graduating high school class or friends you may have had from high school, your siblings, people that kind of go through life's journey with you. Long-term marriage success is based on this strong sense of shared experiences. What we mean by that is if you're married to someone and you go through, again, the birth of children, you go through buying a home together, you go through losses together, all of those shared experiences make your relationship stronger. Life satisfaction for the elderly is really companionship. As we said, if you were to be widowed when you get into your later years, when you think about remarrying, the kind of person you think about remarrying is different from the mate you were looking for when you were younger. Because what's important to you in later life is companionship. That's what you want. You want someone to be your friend. You want someone who's going to go through this last aging process with you. Frail elderly refers to someone who is infirm, has an illness, or cognitively disabled. ADLs are our activities of daily life. So if you work where you're interested in physical therapy, occupational therapy, all of those different types of care that we provide are really focused on ADLs. They're focused on patients' ability to care for themselves. Elder abuse, only about 5% report elder abuse. I believe this statistic is much higher, but it's we find that adults don't want to report that they have typically it's a loved one that's caregiving for them who's actually abusing them in some way. Nursing home costs, and I think this number is a little old. I think the statistic was from 2011, but $85,775 per year, right? Per year. And so we have to really factor that in when you're talking about retirement, when you're talking about aging, when you're talking about what type of support system you may or may not have in place. Assisted living. So assisted living really means that what we call middle or intermediate care. When we talk about caring for our elderly individuals, we start off with what we might think of as senior housing or retirement living, where we might have a complex of little apartments and maybe you offer meals and that's it. That's kind of independent living. The middle one would be assisted living, and this is where we might have a nurse that administers medication. We make sure to transport patients to dialysis 3 times a week. So we're doing a little bit of medical care, and then the highest level of care is going to be skilled nursing, which is 24-hour care. All right, our final chapter on death and dying. When we look at death, what we really find is that the difference is it's less familiar, right? Back in the turn of the century, in 1900, the average life expectancy was 47 because we died of disease. We did not have the tremendous advancements we have in pharmaceuticals and in medical intervention. And so we died at 47. All of a sudden, here we are, we're dying at 76 and 81. So there's just been a huge difference in what we're dying from, where we're dying at, how we're dying. So all of these things is very less familiar to us. So again, you and I understand that when our grandparent or a parent or someone passes away, that's a very final stage. However, for children, remember, we think back to the chapters we had talking about static reasoning for kids and talking about their mind. They're not able to really process that grandpa is never coming back. Or they may really believe they caused grandpa to pass away. So your preschooler might say something like, oh, I told grandpa that he smelled. Did he die because I told him that? Right? They might believe there's this cause and effect and that they caused it, because children typically think they are the cause. When parents fight, they think they're the cause of that. And so you'll have to keep explaining to your preschooler or children that has nothing to do with them, and that they may repeat over and over, isn't grandpa coming back tomorrow? Isn't grandpa coming back tomorrow? They won't be able to process it for some time. So their take on death is a little bit different. All right, as we get older, anxiety about dying actually decreases and hope increases, right? When we're 20, when we're 30, death is something scary to us. We have anxiety because we don't want to die. However, when you get to be 70 and 80, you start to realize it's inevitable and it's coming. And so you become less anxious about it, maybe even preparing for it with wills and different things like that. And you become more hopeful about the next generation, about hopefully your children or grandchildren or those you've mentored and what life might be like for them. Right? A good death. What is a good death? We really talked about 6 different characteristics of a good death. You know, all of us, when we think about dying, we always think, kind of like if you've ever saw the movie The Titanic, I always think back to Rose, the main character. She dies at 102, warm in her bed, right? After living a long life, she goes to sleep and just doesn't wake up. Most of us think of dying as, I just want to go to sleep and not wake up. I don't want pain. I don't want suffering. I don't want to be, in the hospital bed in a sterile room that I'm not familiar with. I want to be at home. I want to be surrounded by loved ones, right? You want all of those things. Primarily, a good death is not being alone. Nobody should be alone when they die. And that's what we would consider to be a good death. Hopefully you're with loved ones. Kubler-Ross. So Kubler-Ross is really the psychiatrist who developed these 5 stages of grief and loss. And she says there's 5 different things we go through when we lose a loved one. And I'm going to go a step further and explain that it's not just when we lose a loved one. It has to do with loss. So perhaps your mother and father were married for 50 years, and then for some reason, one partner leaves the other. let's say your father leaves your mother. Your mother is going to go through Kubler's 5 stages of grief and loss, because even though her partner is alive, that marriage has now been lost. And it's a grieving process. So if we lose a job that we had for 40 years, right? Those things are a valid loss. And we need to help people grieve through those things. I have a friend that just recently went into an assisted living facility. She had to leave her home of 40 years. And she is grieving. She calls me up grieving because that home is where her children were born. It was her place, and she misses it. And so it's a valid grief and loss. So Kubler-Ross is going to say that the first thing we typically go through is denial, right? So if your mother comes and tells you that she has been given a cancer diagnosis, the first thing you do is say, okay, Mom, we're going to get a second opinion and a third opinion and a fourth opinion. There's no way, you're only 55, there's no way you got cancer, right? We go into a state of denial, right? That's the first stage. Hospice. So if your loved one goes into hospice, they can expect pain management. That's what they can expect from hospice. And palliative care is really how we deliver that pain management. And so for hospice patients, you must be 6 months from death's door, meaning that if your mother gets a terminal diagnosis and she has about 18 months to live, she will not be able to qualify for hospice until she's about 6 months from death. Hospice is really allowing a loved one to die at home, whether that's their home or it's your home as the adult child, but it means you're going to take care of your loved one. The nurse might come in once a week to deliver some pain management medication. The loved one is the one who's going to be taking care of their mom or dad or their loved one. That's it. And so hospice is allowing that individual to accept death, allowing them to just, have pain management. We're not looking at new therapies. We're not looking at, cures. It's past that stage. And that's what hospice is. Brain death. So when the brain no longer has any electrical activity, that is when we are considered to be dead now. So understand that we can keep your organs going. So someone who's brain dead, we could definitely pump air into your lungs. We can keep your heart going. However, if there is no activity in our cognitive brain, then we are really not able to get up and walk, to get up and do anything. And so that is now considered to be the definition of death. A DNR, a do not resuscitate order, means that the individual has chosen not to have CPR administered to them should they go into cardiac arrest. So if somebody has a DNR and we respect that DNR, it allows the body to die on its own. It allows for what we call a natural death. A living will is a medical interventions stated should you ever be unconscious. So different from a will. A will is really a way to bequeath and to determine who gets your possessions, who gets the things that you have accrued in life, whether that be money or your collection of CDs or whatever it be. That's what a will is. And you want to have a will because you really don't want to have probate. You don't want to allow the government to come in and make those decisions for you. You want to make those decisions. A living will is a document that's valid for if something were to happen to you while you're alive. So if you were in a car accident and you are incapacitated, meaning that you can't speak for yourself, you're in a coma, and the doctor wants to do a risky surgery and there's pros and cons, a living will assign a proxy or a healthcare proxy. It will assign somebody to make those decisions for you. So typically someone that you trust, someone that you've had conversations with about, if something happened to you, what would you want done? And that's what a living will do. Grief. Grief is the deep sorrow that we feel after death. Grief can be powerful, right? So grief is how you are expressing this loss. Some people, it's just extremely overwhelming. It's extremely overwhelming, and they are constantly in a state of pain, constantly in a state of crying, of mourning, of loss. Other people may appear to be extremely closed off. They may appear not to react at all. So you might be wondering, gosh, she just lost her mother. She's not even crying. I would really caution our judgment, because I think that some people realize that if they were to allow their emotions in public to open up, they couldn't handle it. They literally can't handle it. And so we all grieve differently, and we need to kind of be aware of that grieving process. I know my mother did that. As I shared, I've lost my brother to AIDS, and my mother kind of shut down emotionally. She was not able to, at the end, to kind of just connect. And in no way should we blame her for that. That was her way of processing. Thank goodness I've never lost a child, because I can't fathom that loss. Cannot fathom it, right? Most couples who lose a child actually divorce within a year, because the grief is so traumatic, and most couples grieve differently. And so if you lose a child and you're unable to talk with each other or to deal with your grief together, your marriage will not survive it. Thank goodness my parents have been married 55 years now. So they were able to do that because they sought some help. So after the loss, they went to some counseling, and they got some help for that, because it's a very, very traumatic thing. So grief can be powerful, very powerful. Mourning is actually kind of it's kind of the either religious or culturally based traditions and practices that we do. So I am reading about some of your mourning processes in your paper number 3. So your paper number 3 really was an exemplification of mourning and what you wanted that to look like as you celebrated your end of life experience. That's it, guys, for exam number 4. I'm going to go ahead and open it up early, because I've had some of you ask if we can do that. And as long as you've processed the information, I hope you do well on the exam. Again, it's been a very pleasurable and fun summer session, and I thank you for sharing in your papers and in your reflections and your questions to me. It's just been a really overwhelming display of authenticity, vulnerability, of honesty, and I just, again, really commend you for that. I'm very proud of you all. So looking forward to your future successes, of which I expect many, many. So keep in touch, guys. Bye-bye.